And now I would like to welcome Ashley Feasley, Director of Policy at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Office of Migration and Refugee Services. Welcome, Ashley. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Let's jump right into the questions we have for you today. How would you describe the current situation for families and individuals living in the U.S. without documentation? What's the state of the current immigration policies and enforcement priorities and their impact on this population?
Well, Chris, currently we're seeing a lot of fear and uncertainty for immigrant families who are living in the interior, who themselves are undocumented or are members of mixed status families, so maybe a member of their family unit is undocumented. A lot of this fear and uncertainty comes not only from the rhetoric coming from the president, but also from an executive order that he issued in December of 2017, which effectively removed the prioritization of certain felon undocumented immigrants and made anyone who was here in an undocumented status to be a priority for removal. Immediately, we saw not only just intensified fear in the community in response to this announcement, but in the past 2 years, we've seen a 40% increase of arrests for undocumented who have no criminal charge against them, but for their undocumented status. This has created many situations of high-profile deportations, family separations, and a constant fear for those who are living in the interior, many whom have lived here for many years, have U.S. citizen children, are in their community. The fear is very real, and we are continuing to see arrests of particularly this population.
Thanks, Ashley. Now, moving to kind of a different subset of that population, the Ignatian Network has been significantly engaged in the efforts to support DACA recipients, one of a number of temporary immigration statuses that have been in limbo since President Trump's tenure as president began. Where does DACA stand, and can you talk a little bit about where temporary protected status, TPS, stands as well?
First, I'd like to say thanks to the Ignatian Solidarity Network for their amazing work, particularly on DACA and for Dreamers. I want to say to those of you who work with the Ignatian Solidarity Network, who work at universities, your advocacy and your solidarity on this issue has been instrumental in helping us to move this issue forward, so thank you. As many of you know, the president attempted to end the DACA program in September of 2017. He was because it immediately was challenged by several different courts, namely a federal court in New York, a federal court in California, and a federal court in DC, who all argued for the continuation of the program and asked for what's known as a preliminary injunction, or pause, on the attempts to terminate the program. That pause was put into place, and we saw that DACA recipients, existing DACA recipients, were allowed to renew their DACA and have been ever since. However, no new DACA applicants may apply. While these 3 court cases have moved forward, another court in the Southern District of Texas moved forward in the opposite direction, threatening the entire existence of the DACA program. Currently, all of these cases are winding their way up to the Supreme Court. The president attempted to ask for the Supreme Court to hear this case during this spring 2019 session. He wanted them effectively to bypass the circuit courts. The Supreme Court declined to do that, so we will not see the Supreme Court issue a DACA decision during this session, which ends in June. It's a possibility we could see it in the next session, which is the fall 2019, but we're not certain. What does this mean for DACA recipients now, and how does this affect Congress? Well, for DACA recipients now, they can still apply to renew their DACA, but no new applicants are admitted to the program. And there still is quite a bit of confusion about applications and what the process is and whether people are eligible. I suggest if you have questions, you go to cliniclegal.org. They have a wonderful backgrounder that can explain the eligibility requirements, and look to speak to a legal service provider if you need to be renewed. However, the quest for legislation to ensure permanent legal protection and a path to citizenship remains. Recently, we've received positive news that the House of Representatives plans to move on a piece of legislation that will affect both Dreamers and TPS holders, temporary protected status holders. There's going to be a hearing on this Wednesday in the House Judiciary about the legislation, and we expect the legislation to be introduced on the 12th of March. The hearing this Wednesday, the 6th, will actually feature Catholic Bishop Mario Dorsonville of the Archdiocese of Washington. It's important to understand that while all this legislation is going on and certain people still have DACA protection, they still have lives of uncertainty. We still need permanent legal protection and a path to citizenship for all Dreamers, not just the 700,000 DACA recipients, but the 1.8 million people who maybe are right around the age bracket or maybe didn't have the money to apply for the DACA program, but still should be eligible for this protection. For this reason, it's very important to work with your lawmaker to promote them and engage them in the fact that we need permanent legal solution and a path to citizenship for Dreamers today, yesterday, now. It's an urgent situation. You asked me briefly about the temporary protected status holders, and their situation is actually somewhat similar. In 2017 and 2018, we saw the administration cancel some very high-profile TPS country designations, including El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Sudan. All told, we estimate that that population is approximately 300,000 individuals who've been living here in the United States in a legal status with legal work authorization, in some cases for almost 20 years. All told, we estimate out of these 300,000 TPS holders who've had their status terminated, there's approximately 270,000 U.S. citizen children who have parents who are in this situation. So for the church, this is a similarly important issue of family unity. The designations were canceled by the Trump administration, but similar to the DACA situation, we saw many of the TPS holders turn to the courts for protection. One major lawsuit, Ramos v. Nielsen, has protections put in place on a temporary basis for TPS holders from Haiti, Sudan, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. Yesterday, there was an announcement that these protections will go into January of 2020. While that may seem like a victory, and in some senses it is, similar to the DACA population, we're still seeing people living in great uncertainty and limbo. There are many questions left from that pending litigation, and it is only a temporary fix because the court cases proceed forward, as do the DACA cases. Similarly, we need a form of legal protection and permanent relief from Congress, and will continue to advocate. And similar to the DACA and Dreamer population, this population will be addressed in the legislation that will be introduced on March 12th.
That was great. Thanks, Ashley, for breaking that down for us. Let's turn to the U.S.-Mexico border. You and I were both on the border earlier this week as there was a gathering of bishops from the state of Texas and New Mexico, bishops that have dioceses that run along the border, as well as bishops from Mexico, who are part of that borderland region as well, and other faith leaders from the church and other faith traditions were there as well. So we were recently there, had an experience there. There's been a lot of attention brought to the situation of both children and adults coming to the U.S.-Mexico border from Central America, seeking asylum or other forms of refugee status here in the U.S. What is the current situation of the Trump administration policies regarding asylum, as well as how does border security policy fit into this? What's happening for people who are coming to the border?
Thanks, Chris. I think it's a really important point that we need to talk about and clarify some of the situation at our U.S.-Mexico border. This administration has spoken repeatedly about a humanitarian crisis and a security crisis at our border. The reality is is that people are not coming in the numbers that we saw in the 1990s and early aughts under the Clinton and Bush administration. But who is coming has dramatically changed. We used to see larger numbers of male, primarily Mexican, more labor-minded migrants. And what we're seeing today is flows of vulnerable people seeking humanitarian relief. Larger numbers of families and unaccompanied children are coming in numbers that they haven't come before. And this number continues to grow from what we've seen in 2013 on. This is in response to the continued need to address root causes. Most of the individuals who are coming, a majority of them do come from the Northern Triangle countries. They face violence, armed conflict, gang and police impunity, and we see them fleeing for their lives because their families are increasingly being threatened because they do not have protection from their state. The Trump administration has administered a number of policies to make it more difficult for particularly this population to apply for asylum in the United States. On the US side, there's been a focus on cracking down on immigration judges by adding quotas, by taking away positive case law, such as the matter of AB, which allowed a particular social group to include women who face domestic violence from the Northern Triangle countries, and other measures that make it more difficult. At the border and in Mexico, we're seeing a policy of entry only at the ports of entry, which is met by Border Patrol officers metering or measuring out per day the number of individuals that are allowed to apply for asylum. Similarly, we're seeing a new policy that you mentioned, the Remain in Mexico policy. While not a lot is known exactly about this policy and its extent of implementation, what we do know right now is this policy is being carried out in San Diego and the San Ysidro port of entry. It requires that those who are looking to apply for asylum go to the port of entry, have their credible fear interview on US soil, and then are sent back to Mexico to wait for often many long periods, up to weeks and months in some cases, in what we think will be humanitarian camps, while they have the chance to go forward to have an actual immigration asylum hearing. The consequences of this type of policy, particularly if the US government looks to fully implement it without stopping, could be disastrous for humanitarian aid and particularly harmful for the vulnerable groups that we're seeing coming in larger numbers. As a result, the Catholic Church, I think, is in a unique position to push back on this, but also offer aid and assistance. But a key piece of this is we don't know as much about this policy as we would like, and we need to be educating lawmakers about how harmful and the human impact that this policy could have.
It sounds like the people out in our network, people watching this virtual teaching today really need to pay attention to the news in the next few weeks to hear more about how and where this policy is being implemented.
Yes, it's very important. We have a backgrounder available on our page, and I can send you the links. And also, there have been a number of faith-based groups that have promoted this issue. I encourage everyone to consider maybe participating with the Ignatian Solidarity Network to do a volunteer or accompaniment border trip to see for themselves the real, true human impact.
Excellent. And speaking of the border again, what is the status of the efforts by the Trump administration to further the border wall? How is the effort of President Trump influencing other elements of border policy as well?
So you just have to watch the news to see how much of a focal point the Trump policy is on the wall. As everyone knows, the Trump administration shut down the government for 35 days from December 20th of 2018 until late January of 2019. During that time, approximately 20% of the government went on a furlough situation where they weren't getting paid, and countless other contractor workers were held hostage as well. The package that the president refused to sign in December had approximately $1.6 billion for the wall, and it had been voted on in both the Senate and the House. He refused to sign, as we know. They moved forward with a short-term 15-day agreement that ended on February 15th, in which both Republicans and Democrats appointed certain Department of Homeland Security appropriations conferees. These individuals were selected by their parties to negotiate an enforcement package of funding that would, in theory, keep open the government and let the government continue to operate after the shutdown. The lawmakers were able to come to a bipartisan agreement, and in that agreement, the two most important elements when we think about immigration enforcement was the wall funding, which provided a $1.3 billion fencing and additional improvements on existing segment of the wall, and then a higher level of immigrant detention beds than what we currently have, ranging from about 45,000, and before the estimates had been 40,500. So a certain increase, definitely. So the president did sign the bipartisan agreement that the DHS appropriators had agreed to. But then the next day, he declared an emergency declaration where he requested a total of $8 billion for the wall. He put together the asks. It was the $1.6 billion from the congressional package that was signed, and then roughly $5 billion came from the Armed Services Department of Defense budget. The categories where the money was taken from include military family housing, base improvements, and civil construction sites that had been allotted for last year, fiscal 18 and fiscal 19. Immediately, the emergency declaration was brought to court. There are currently 3 major lawsuits against the emergency declaration. One notably is from 16 state attorney generals that include a bipartisan group of both Republican and Democrat governors. No money at this time has been dispersed, and the House issued a resolution against the emergency declaration. It passed last Tuesday. Every Democrat in the House voted for it, and 16 Republicans did, so it passed easily. It now must be brought up in the Senate within 15 days. Right now, we know that at least 3 Republican senators are publicly on the record as planning to vote with the Democrats to oppose the declaration. Those 3 Republicans are Senator Murkowski of Alaska, Senator Tillis of North Carolina, and then Senator Collins, who actually was one of the introducers and co-sponsors of this declaration in the Senate. We expect the vote to be very close. The president has the right to veto it, but it then can go back to the Senate and the House to override that veto. Regardless of the outcome here, you can expect that wall funding will be a contentious and primary issue for the Trump administration in every appropriations process going forward. We will continue to fight against this type of funding in lieu of, other more reasonable and humane enforcement measures.
Ashley, thinking a little bit long term, in kind of a broader vision, the church for many years has been calling for immigration reform that is comprehensive and humane. Where does that call fit in where we are now and where we hope we might be able to go in the future?
So thanks, Chris. I think the call for comprehensive immigration reform, it continues for the church, and I'm hoping it continues. The current efforts to give protections to TPS holders and Daca beneficiaries and the larger Dreamer population may seem like a smaller piece of that, but it is in response to the urgency that these particular populations are feeling. The church will continue to advocate for legalization for the entire undocumented population, as well as for more common sense and humane immigration reforms. While Catholic social teaching does recognize the right of nations to control their borders, we continue to advocate on the Hill that right comes with a responsibility. And that responsibility is that these policies are humane and just. And as you can see from some of the stories of families in the interior who are facing, arrests despite not having criminal records, as well as communities that are being displaced by the wall or detention beds that are, popping up with greater frequency. There's certainly some moral questionability about some of these enforcement policies, and we will continue to push for a vision that is more humane, comprehensive, and respectful of due process. That being said, efforts for meaningful reform have been limited. There have been numerous votes in the Senate and the House in the last congressional session. Not a single one were able to pass either House or Senate and get a majority to move forward. So the need for advocacy and a continued voice on comprehensive immigration reform by Catholics continues unabated. We rely and hope to partner more with you and the universities that you speak to continue that fight, and most importantly, give voice to the young church leaders and immigrant leaders who give such a face and frankly are the future of our church and of our communities.
Thank you, Ashley. That was really helpful, and thank you again for being with us today, for your work at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the work of your lay colleagues as well as the bishops in advocating for humane migration policies. We're really grateful for that work. We're grateful for you taking time today to be with us in the midst of trying to enjoy your weekend. So thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
As we prepare to wrap up our time together, I'd like to welcome Cecilia González-Andrieu, an associate professor of theological studies at her alma mater, Loyola Marymount University. Her work has bridged theology and the arts, and she has written and presented on topics including the relationship between justice, beauty, and art as a bridge to community, Latina and Latino theology, immigration, and educational justice. Cecilia will lead us in our closing reflection and prayer.
My reason for joining you today is to invite you to slow down and listen to your heart. If I asked you, why do you care about something as difficult as immigration? What would you answer me? Would you say it's because you have heard the stories of migration of your own family, and this is a way to honor their hard work and sacrifice? Or do you have close friends who are caught up in the web of confusion and disappointment of current immigration policies? Or is it because you work with an organization, volunteer your time, have done immersion trips to the border or to other parts of the world where the suffering of people on the move is painfully evident? Or is it because you have come awake to the truth that the headlines don't do justice to the real human stories involved, and you want to know more? Perhaps you would tell me that it's because you see caring for the most vulnerable, your neighbor, as a truly non-negotiable requirement of your faith. So I ask you again, why do you care about this? So to help us get in touch with our heart, let's do something that St. Ignatius of Loyola taught us. It is called imaginative contemplation. So for this, I need you to get comfortable in your seat, close your eyes, and trust that all will be fine while you let go of everything else. Listen to the story and see it take shape in your mind's eye like a movie. Be in the room and notice what is happening and how you feel about what is happening. This is a story based on the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, verses 1 to 15. You must imagine how strange it must have felt to have important people from another country, people Mary and Joseph didn't know, come knocking on the door of the shelter where they were staying and telling them they had been looking for them. They seemed like good and wise men, people who knew a lot. And Joseph and Mary tried to be hospitable, but they were tired. And their new baby kept them up at night with needing to feed him and protect him from the cold. But he was a good baby. And even if they were not in their own little house in Nazareth, the people in Bethlehem had been kind and offered them shelter while Mary recovered. The important men who had come to visit had said something that seemed very strange to Joseph, that the authorities, especially the guy in charge, Herod, had told them that he was looking for them too. What was that about? He was just a poor carpenter and they had nothing to do with important people. There was something frightening about this attention from Herod and about how troubled the wise men seemed to be about it. They had now left and told the young couple they would not go back through Jerusalem so they could avoid Herod's people. This was all Mary and Joseph could talk about this night while Mary rocked the baby. And after tossing and turning for a while, Joseph finally fell asleep. It was not an easy sleep. He heard voices and woke up with a start, knowing what he needed to do. He moved as quietly as he could around the darkened room and gathered the few things they had, some blankets and a little food and water for the road. Once he had everything in a pile and ready to load up on their donkey, he woke up Mary, who had dozed off. "Shh," he told her. "Let's try not to wake up the baby so he won't cry. We need to go. We have to leave Bethlehem, or they're going to come looking for us and it's not going to be good." She looked up at him frightened, but she knew to trust him. "Here, hand me the baby. Wrap yourself up tight in your cloak, Mary. It's really cold outside." "Are we going to leave in the dark without saying goodbye?" she asked him in a whisper. "Yes, we need to go now. And if our friends here know about it, they might arrest them too. It's better they don't know anything." Mary covered her head and face against the cold. "Where are we going?" she whispered to Joseph. "We'll head south and across the border into Egypt. No one will know us there, and I hope we can be safe. I can work there, I hope. Everybody needs a carpenter, right?" "Yes, we can hope that people in Egypt will be kind to us," Mary answered him. "And you will find work, even if we are strangers and don't speak their language. They won't turn us away or tell the authorities. I know God will be with us." Joseph lifted Mary up onto the donkey and placed Jesus gently in her arms. And with one last look at Bethlehem, they started on the dusty road to the border by the light of the moon. So I ask you again, why do you care about this? Ask your heart.
Thank you to everyone from the Ignatian family who joined us today for the Ignatian Solidarity Network's first virtual teach-in, Examining Migration Realities and Policy. A recording will be available immediately following this event at igsol.net/virtual. That's igsol.net/virtual. Also, as you prepare to respond to your experience today, make sure to check out our resources for Ignatian Family Advocacy Month this March, right now, including migration-related advocacy talking points and backgrounder materials. You can find these at igsol.net/IFAM. In addition, make sure to learn more about the Campaign for Hospitality, an ISN effort to promote a culture of hospitality towards those who migrate throughout the United States and Canada by visiting campaignforhospitality.org. We urge you to continue the conversation that started here today, to deepen your understanding and work as an advocate as we work together to uphold the dignity of people, including those who migrate. Thank you.